his time away right now.
And on that note, we're going to get to something roughly similar. We've got Alonzo in Virginia. You're on with Jen and Matt.
Hey, Matt. Hey, Jen.
Hi.
Great to see you. This is my first time actually watching you guys live, so that's great. So what I've been doing recently is I've been watching a lot of YouTube videos that have Matt in them. And
I'm sorry.
And I was like, yeah, well, one of the things that you said in one of those videos was that you weren't completely sure that if, say Jesus or Thor or whatnot came down from the sky, that you could believe that they were God. Is that still kind of your view?
How would you tell? Like if somebody came down and revealed themselves and said, I am Jesus and I am divine, how would you prove either of those?
That it's him, that it's not some guy that just walked off his fire escape 8 stories up and it's a cloudy day. How do we not know?
Right. So one of the things...
That's a legit question.
Yeah, no, it's an actual question.
Can you answer it?
Yeah, so basically, here's kind of my perspective and what I was thinking. There's kind of 2 kinds of God. You have this, the tri-omni God, and then you have pretty much every other God that's ever existed, like, Thor and...
Okay, there's 2 kinds of people. There's... you can do this all day long.
Yeah.
There's many different types of God categories. I'm just saying... You were asking me because people had asked, hey, if Jesus came down and revealed himself to you. Now, if it were in fact Jesus and he in fact was divine and he had some way of revealing and demonstrating this to me, of course I would believe.
Right.
My question is, the example that people give presumes quite a bit. Presumes that this is something that could happen or could be self-evident. I'm just saying if somebody comes down and says, hey, I'm Jesus and I'm divine, how could you prove either of those things?
Right. Well, the easy way is let's not say use Jesus. Let's use, say, Thor as an example. Let's say Thor comes down. He's got this hammer. He spins it and he throws it, and it comes back. Somebody eats his goats, and he says, "Okay, let's take those goat bones and remake the goats and whatnot."
Okay. So now you've got someone who's claiming to be Thor, and I'm assuming Thor in a God sense,
right?
And he can do a magic trick with a hammer, and he can revive dead goats that have been ripped to pieces, right?
That have been picked to bones. I think he said
now,
specifically.
How did he do either one of those things?
I don't think it matters. How he did it. We can just observe that he does.
But then what do we have to test against if this guy's lying and pulling a magic trick over an actual miracle, quote unquote? If we can't say how he did it, how do we know it's not the Loch Ness Monster? How do we know it's not Bigfoot in pictures? Why would that make us believe that it was real?
The time to believe something is after there's evidence for it. Right. Now, if somebody showed up, claimed they were Thor, threw their hammer, it came back to them, what I would believe is that they're able to throw their hammer and have it come back to them. If they were able to take dismembered goats and put them back together and bring them back to life, what I would believe is that they're able to take dismembered goats and bring them back to life. Those would both be incredibly impressive. But if I don't have the ability, this is why Arthur C. Clarke pointed out that any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. There's a knowledge threshold. There's something where beyond that, I just don't understand. It does not enter my ken. I can't understand it. And so to proclaim that this person is in fact a god or is in fact doing something supernatural would be to claim that I have an understanding of the supernatural sufficient to reach that conclusion. And I don't see that anybody else does, and nobody's come up with a mechanism to show this. So it reminds me when I debated Lacona, and he was like, well, if somebody came in and chopped my head off, and you went out in the lobby, and I walked out with my head back on, wouldn't you call that a miracle? And I'd say, well, there's a lot of questions there, but what I would believe is that you had your head chopped off, and now your head's back on. But the how and why behind it and what the explanation is, I don't know.
Right. So basically, one of the things I wanted to get to was the fact that most gods are basically sufficiently powerful beings from, Clarke's definition, as it were, and that if a sufficiently powerful being comes down and does sufficiently powerful things, we should believe that, these sufficiently powerful beings, exist. If that makes sense.
I would be fine to accept that a sufficiently powerful being exists to do what was demonstrated, but this is how you make cargo cults. I'm talking about whether or not something is actually supernatural. There are magic tricks that I can do that would make me a god to incredibly primitive people, but that doesn't mean I am. Just because something's happening that's beyond their understanding doesn't mean that it rises to the level of the supernatural. People have been faking the supernatural for as long as we've been around, as far as I can tell.
For as long as there's been religion.
I'm just not arrogant enough to say, I have in fact discovered and confirmed the supernatural just because I don't know how something was done.
Right. And that would be basically a supernaturalism of the, yes, I don't know how it's done, therefore it must be supernatural.
Right. That's a fallacy.
That's a fallacy, right. And that does not push either one of us to believe. We want to see how it was done. We want to know why it was done.
If somebody can demonstrate that the supernatural exists and how we can test for that, then I'm fine with the supernatural. But nobody's done that. What's happened is we've had a monumentally lengthy history of human beings who think they've done that or claim they've done that. And every time we've been able to test to actually verify if they're correct, they've not been correct. In all of history, every time we've found the actual cause for something, it has never been supernatural. There are still questions we don't have an explanation for, and it would be just as much of a mistake for us to presume that the explanation is supernatural for those things as it was for lightning being caused by Zeus. Interesting. Hey, thanks for your response there. There's a couple of other things I wanted to ask you about, and this one kind of actually ties in, is how do you feel about what are called supernatural hallucinations, say, from mushrooms or whatnot? They're one of the things that... why would you call them supernatural?
Why would they be a supernatural phenomenon?
I've taken hallucinogenics. We've studied hallucinogenics.
Yes.
You have a brain that is altered, that is seeing things that aren't there. What on earth would possess you to think that they're seeing something that's real and that the explanation is then also supernatural?
Think about it like this, okay? You have visual hallucinations, say. Okay? And what that would indicate is that, yes, these specific visual hallucinations I'm having are not real. Okay. And so having what we might describe as spiritual hallucinations indicates that we might have some sort of spiritual sense, which perhaps implies the spiritual reality.
No, even if we have, so what we have is flawed understandings of things. And so we're not sensing the supernatural. We're experiencing something and calling it supernatural.
Right.
When I see something, when I'm on drugs, I call it a hallucination only to the extent that I'm aware that what I'm experiencing has no corollary in reality as far as I can tell. If it turns out that something that I saw on an acid trip is actually gazing into a world beyond our own, I still don't know that it's supernatural. And until somebody comes up with a way to actually investigate that, it's just a cool trip.
Right. And as far as spiritual awakenings, and we've heard these spiritual retreats with peyote, with acid and everything
DMT,
else.
ayahuasca.
DMT, right. You have to remember that you're coming into this trip, which severely alters your brain, with these kind of preconceptions and this is already what I believe. And I don't give a shit what anyone says. If you're going to take something like that, you're hyping yourself up before. I'm going to see some cool shit. I'm going to feel some cool shit. So you're already setting the stage for you to feel some out-of-body experience that you're going to equate to spirituality, if that's what you believe in. There's nothing supernatural about this. It's your brain's own programming about what you believe.
As far as we can tell. And so, have you seen Empire Strikes Back?
Yes, I have. I love Star Wars.
Sweet. Jen just watched all of them this week.
Yes, this is fresh for me.
You remember when Yoda's training Luke, and he's getting ready to head in there, and he says, "What's in there?" And he says, "Only what you take with you." That's what goes into a trip as far as we can tell. All of the baggage of your brain, whatever expectations you have, and then an altered chemical state. I'm not saying there's nothing more than that. I'm saying if there's more than that, somebody would need to demonstrate it. The same as Thor reviving goats.
Okay, awesome. Hey, it was really great to get your thoughts on that. There's only one thing I kind of like to also get your thoughts about before I'm done is one of the things is that skepticism seems to be basically, hey, we're going to ask questions about these things. And can you call yourself a Christian, honestly going through and, being skeptical about everything and then reaching the conclusion that God does indeed exist?
That's a great question.
That's a great question.
And the answer is yes, you can call yourself whatever the hell you want. But if, as other people have pointed out, if you think that you've used skepticism and reached the conclusion that there is in fact a God,
have you used skepticism correctly?
I think you've used skepticism incorrectly, because if you could do that, if a God claim could withstand the rigors of inquiry such that a critical examination would actually confirm a God's existence, you would have essentially proved God and fundamentally changed the world.
Right.
Skepticism isn't about a list of positions.
No.
It's about a method of understanding reality and trying to have the best understanding you can. It doesn't mean that you're going to be a perfect thinker. It doesn't mean you're not going to make mistakes. So you can be a skeptic and be a Christian, but you're probably doing one of them or both of them poorly.
You could be skeptical about your Christianity.
Or you could call yourself a Christian and just have we've had some people call with some really unique versions of Christianity. In much the same way that there's like the Jews for Jesus, there are these skeptical, the non-theistic Jesus acolytes. And so they would call themselves Christian. Mm-hmm. Like take Thomas Jefferson, for example. If you go look at the Jefferson Bible, he chopped out everything that had anything to do with miracles or whatever and just took the words from Jesus that he considered to be wisdom. And so you could call yourself a Christian in that context and believe nothing supernatural.
Mm-hmm.
You could be skeptical about religion and be religious. You can question it. But to call yourself a skeptic Christian?
It's unusual. You could call yourself that.
Sure.
I'd want to know more. Because I'm a skeptic.
Okay.
Because then we'd have to get into, well, why are you being a skeptic about your Christianity?
What do you mean when you say you're a Christian? What do you mean when you say you're a skeptic?
Why are you questioning it to begin with in the first place? And then we can get the ball rolling on, well, are you really a Christian? Are you solid in your faith?
Yeah, but the problem is that I don't get to define what is or isn't a true Christian.
Right.
And that's why people can call me and say, I'm a Christian and I don't believe in anything supernatural and I don't believe in this and I don't believe in that. But there was this alien guy who came down from another planet and he was Yeshua and that's why he didn't have a father and he, all this other stuff. You can come up with whatever you want and call it Christian.
Right. Okay. Well, one of the things is that I feel like I'm constantly, questioning my faith, trying to see if it holds up against reality. And for me, at the least, I feel like it has, and.
Well, what kind of test have you done that passed? Because that would be interesting.
So, so I've got to, I guess, back up a little bit in terms of my experience. Is that I feel like I've had experiences of God in my life where God has, come to me and directly talked to me. And it's not always what I wanted to hear at the time, and so. So
I'm gonna interrupt because I kind of have to.
Yeah.
Because also we're running short on time. Yeah. But I need clarification on some things.
Yeah.
You say God's talked to you. Is it an audible voice or a feeling or what?
A vision or, yeah.
So for me, it's just like somebody talking to me,
Like you hear it through your ears or in your head?
In your head.
In my head.
Okay, so it's not like somebody talking to you. So you said it was like somebody talking to you. When people talk to me, I don't just hear it in my head. I hear it through my ears, clearly.
That sounds more like an inner voice kind of grappling with yourself and being skeptical about yourself.
Now the next question is, so you have this experience where you perceive it as someone communicating with you. We won't necessarily have to label it telepathic or whatever,
right.
But in your head, how do you determine that voice is anything other than you and what your brain does? And then after you've determined that it's something other than you and what your brain does, how did you determine that it's likely to be a God as opposed to some technology you don't understand?
Yeah. So for me, I'm always in my head, if you know what I mean. You're constantly listening to yourself and how you talk to yourself. Does that make sense? And the God voice in my head, as it were, it doesn't talk to me in that same tone, as it were.
Are you saying like the same pitch and the same reasoning? that you would normally talk to yourself with?
Basically.
Okay.
You know, I'm not sure how to describe it. It's like how I know that Jen's voice and Matt's voice are different. They just sound different.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure. But the thing is, you have a normal. Let's get away. We'll call it a voice.
Yeah.
And we're using that incredibly loosely. So there's a normal voice, tone, thought process, whatever that goes on in the internal dialogue that you tend to have with yourself.
I would prefer to use it.
And then there's something that you sense as different in quality about a second internal dialogue that doesn't appear to you to be you talking with you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay.
Have you talked to a therapist, a psychologist at all to determine whether or not you're suffering from schizophrenia, from
Other mental
Uh-huh.
any sort of other mental aberrations that might account for this?
Actually, you know, I have, you know, and as far as, you know, we've been able to tell, it doesn't seem like it's a schizophrenic type of thing.
Cool. So you've got some inner dialogue that's you and another inner dialogue that you don't feel
that
is
is not
you.
you.
How do you figure out what that other inner dialogue is?
What do you mean? I'm sorry, I didn't quite parse that.
Okay. So in the way that you can tell the difference between Jen's voice and my voice, you can tell the difference between these two inner dialogues, you talking with you versus you talking with what you perceive to be God.
Mm-hmm.
How did you determine that it is in fact something other than you and rather than just another way that your brain might communicate with itself?
That's the question I was going to get to.
I would have let you.
Yeah. Well, here we going.
I don't want to waste time, and basically from that's a good question. You know, I'm going to have to think about that.
Sure.
Since you know, y'all are running out of time, I'll just say bye. It was great talking to you.
Thank you for calling.
Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks, Alonzo. It's one of those things where not everybody can be an expert in like test methodology and other stuff. I have a particular set of skills, having done hardware and software QA for a good number of years, having spent a lot of time analyzing arguments and looking for flaws, and looking at the assumption, and as being a magician since I was 3, I know how people fool themselves, and I know the questions that they don't ask, because the magician's job quite often is to close the doors on those questions so that if you ask them, they seem, oh no, that can't
mystical
be that. Let me move over here. They sometimes get
illusion.
Sometimes gets inappropriately labeled as misdirection, but it's just direction. We're directing you in certain ways so that you're not over here. When you say, hey, I've had these experiences and I put them to the test, okay.
I've always loved that. I put them to the test. How?
What were the tests? Show me the tests, because the same thing that we're hearing from Alonzo, we would hear from someone who thinks that they speak with the dead.
Yes. Or somebody that speaks with the dead, or somebody that I've seen speak with pets, or people. Those crack me up. I'm like, wow, you can translate me out now. That's fantastic. Or somebody that is saying that not even the dead, but not God, but spirits and angels, they speak to them. And
there's a lot of things.
It's $1 million industry for people that do this shit too.
Yep.
But to me, this sounds like just a different internal monologue. I know myself. Go and do it. No, honey, can we not, please? 2 totally different friggin' voices. They sound like me, but they're pitch. And one is the reasonable one, and one's the stupid teenager that will never leave me. But
I did that yesterday. I wanted to get a 12-string guitar because I've wanted one forever and I don't have one.
Yes, the guitar.
And so I went up and I played around. And there was the angel me and the devil me sitting on my shoulders. And of course, I'm being figurative. But yeah, we do stuff like that.
Right,
but it could be that
there are
weird
values. Well, I heard God speak to me. No, honey, you heard yourself speak to you. And this is a rational way to work out the things that you need to work out in your head. Why are you taking the credit from yourself for that?
It would be nice. The thing is, I can't prove that it's him talking to himself.
Right.
But that's not the problem. The problem is he's convinced it's not.
It's not.
And how did you reach that conclusion? And so there's a problem of people not asking the right questions. I just posted a video the other day that begins with a question. You should watch the whole video at some point. But why do mirrors reverse things left to right instead of top to bottom? for some people, they've never heard that question before, and they hear it, and they're like, wow, that is weird. Because, I mean, you can turn the mirror and everything else, and it turns out it's the wrong question. Because mirrors, we don't reverse things left to right.
No.